The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window. Her fingers traced the cool glass while she watched the early morning joggers pass by on the street below. Today was different from all the others. Today, Prince William would leave for his most challenging royal tour yet, a 3-month diplomatic mission to Commonwealth nations that would test both his leadership and their marriage. Catherine had always known this day would come. Royal duties often demanded sacrifice, and separations were part of the price they paid for their positions. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two entirely different experiences. She had spent weeks preparing herself, organizing the children's schedules and ensuring the household would run smoothly in William's absence. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the hollow feeling that had settled in her chest since yesterday. The couple had been married for over a decade, and their love story had captivated the world from the very beginning. From their university days at St. Andrews to their fairy tale wedding watched by billions, William and Catherine had become symbols of modern romance within the ancient institution of the monarchy. Their relationship had weathered public scrutiny, family tensions, and the constant pressure of royal expectations. Through it all, they had remained each other's anchor in the storm of public life. William emerged from the bathroom, already dressed in his navy suit for the departure ceremony. His movements were precise and purposeful, but Catherine could see the tension in his shoulders. He caught her reflection in the window and walked over, placing his hands gently on her arms from behind. They stood together in silence, both understanding that words felt inadequate for this moment. The breakfast table that morning was unusually quiet. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, though they were too young to fully comprehend the length of their father's absence. William helped Louis with his cereal, while Charlotte chattered about her upcoming school play. George, the eldest and most perceptive, kept glancing between his parents with worried eyes. Catherine busied herself with the morning routine, packing the children's school bags and reviewing their schedules with the nanny. Every mundane task felt precious now, these final moments of their normal family life before everything changed. She found herself memorizing small details. The way William's hair fell across his forehead when he leaned down to kiss Charlotte goodbye. The sound of his laughter when Louis told him a silly joke. The gentle way he corrected George's posture at the breakfast table. As the time for departure approached, the palace staff began their final preparations. Security teams conducted last-minute briefings while valets ensured William's luggage was properly packed and labeled. The media had gathered outside, their cameras ready to capture every moment of the farewell. Catherine knew that soon their private goodbye would become a public spectacle, analyzed and discussed by royal watchers around the world. The couple retreated to William's study for a few precious minutes alone. The room was filled with books, family photographs, and mementos from their travels together. Catherine picked up a small framed picture of their wedding day, running her thumb over the glass. They had been so young then, so full of hope and excitement for their future together. Now, 12 years later, they understood the weight of their responsibilities and the sacrifices their roles demanded. William pulled her close, and they held each other without speaking. Catherine could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, steady and strong as always. She had fallen in love with many things about William over the years. His sense of duty, his compassion, his unwavering commitment to his family and country. But in moments like these, she was reminded of the man beneath the prince, the person who worried about missing bedtime stories and school concerts, who wanted to be present for every milestone in his children's lives. A gentle knock at the door interrupted their quiet moment. William's private secretary entered with a respectful bow, informing them that the car was ready and waiting. The time had come. Catherine straightened William's tie one final time, a gesture she had performed countless times before but which now felt incredibly significant. They walked hand in hand toward the front entrance, where their children waited with the nanny to say their final goodbyes before school. The palace doors opened to reveal a scene that would soon be broadcast around the world. Cameras flashed as the royal couple emerged, their faces composed but their clasped hands revealing the emotion beneath the surface. The waiting car sat ready to take William to the airport, where the royal aircraft would begin his journey to the other side of the world. Catherine knew that in just a few hours the man she loved would be thousands of miles away, beginning a chapter of their lives that would test their strength in ways they had never experienced before. The palace courtyard had transformed into a carefully orchestrated scene of royal protocol and raw human emotion. Members of the royal household staff lined the pathway, each person maintaining the perfect balance between professional respect and genuine affection for the prince who had grown up before their eyes. Many had served the family for decades, watching William evolve from a mischievous boy into the future king who now stood before them. Catherine walked beside William toward the waiting vehicle, her composure remarkable despite the storm of emotions churning within her. She had spent years perfecting the art of maintaining dignity under public scrutiny, but today tested every lesson she had learned. The cameras captured each step, each glance, each subtle gesture between the couple. Royal reporters would later analyze every frame, searching for signs of strain or strength in their relationship. The children had been brought out for the final farewell, their small faces a mixture of confusion and sadness. Prince George, at 10 years old, understood enough to know this goodbye was different from their father's usual business trips. He stood straighter than usual, already showing signs of the future responsibility that would one day rest on his shoulders. Princess Charlotte clung to her mother's hand, her usually bright chatter replaced by an unusual quietness that spoke volumes about her intuitive understanding of the moment. Little Prince Louis, barely 5 years old, seemed the least affected by the gravity of the situation. He bounced slightly on his toes, more interested in the impressive black car and the uniformed staff than in the emotional undercurrents swirling around him. Catherine was grateful for his innocence, his ability to remain untouched by the weight of duty that already pressed upon his older siblings. William knelt down to speak with each child individually, his voice too low for the cameras to capture, but his gestures speaking clearly of a father's love and concern. He ruffled George's hair and whispered something that made the boy nod solemnly. With Charlotte, he wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her brave attempts to mirror her mother's composure. For Louis, he simply gathered him in a tight hug, spinning him around once to elicit the giggle that always made William smile. The royal protection officers stood at a respectful distance, their trained eyes scanning the crowd while remaining sensitive to the personal nature of the moment. These men and women had guarded the family through countless public appearances, but private farewells like this one required a different kind of vigilance, protecting not just physical safety but emotional privacy. In a moment when the two were impossible to separate, Catherine's lady-in-waiting approached quietly, offering to take the children back inside if the princess wished for a more private goodbye with her husband. But Catherine shook her head gently. She wanted her children to see this moment, to understand that even in separation, love endured. It was a lesson they would need throughout their lives as members of the royal family, where duty often demanded personal sacrifice. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. William turned to face Catherine fully, his hands reaching for hers. The assembled crowd, staff, security, and media, seemed to hold their breath collectively. This was no longer just a royal departure. It had become something more intimate and universal. Every person watching recognized the pain of saying goodbye to someone they loved, the uncertainty of separation, the hope that love would bridge any distance. William's voice was barely audible as he spoke to Catherine, his words meant only for her ears. She nodded, blinking back tears that threatened to fall despite her years of training in public composure. Her response was equally quiet, but the cameras caught the slight tremor in her lips as she spoke. They had shared thousands of conversations over their years together, but these words carried the weight of 3 months of separation and all the challenges that lay ahead. The embrace that followed seemed to last both forever and not nearly long enough. William pulled Catherine close, and she melted into his arms with a naturalness that spoke of countless similar moments shared in private. For just a few seconds, the watching world fell away, and they were simply a husband and wife saying goodbye. The cameras captured every angle, but somehow the intimacy of the moment remained protected by its very authenticity. When they finally separated, both William and Catherine were fighting back tears. The prince kissed his wife's forehead tenderly, a gesture so natural and loving that even the most cynical royal watchers found themselves moved. Catherine's hand lingered on his chest for a moment before she stepped back, allowing him to complete his duties and begin his journey. The car door closed with a finality that echoed across the courtyard. William's face appeared in the window, his hand pressed against the glass as Catherine raised hers to match it. The vehicle began to move slowly, carrying the future king away from everything he held most dear. Catherine stood perfectly still, watching until the car disappeared from view. Her children gathered close around her. As the sound of the engine faded, the courtyard began to empty. Staff members returned to their duties with unusual quietness, while the media prepared to file their reports about the emotional farewell they had witnessed. But for Catherine, the real challenge was just beginning. She would need to be strong not just for herself, but for her children and for the nation that looked to her as an example of grace under pressure. The first week without William felt like learning to breathe underwater. Catherine had anticipated the loneliness, but she had not expected the way silence would fill every corner of Kensington Palace. The building itself seemed different without William's presence, larger somehow, more formal, less like a home and more like the historic monument it had always been beneath their family's warmth. Catherine threw herself into her royal duties with renewed intensity, as if staying busy could somehow make the time pass more quickly. She attended charity galas, visited hospitals, and opened new community centers. Each appearance required her to be perfectly composed, graciously accepting condolences about William's absence, while maintaining the positive energy expected of a senior royal. The irony was not lost on her that expressing her true feelings about the separation would be seen as a weakness, when in reality, missing her husband demonstrated the strength of their marriage. The children's routines became her anchor in the shifting landscape of their new reality. Morning breakfasts without William were quieter affairs, but Catherine made an effort to fill the silence with questions about school projects and weekend plans. George had taken on a protective role with his younger siblings, helping Charlotte with her reading and playing endless games of football with Louis in the palace gardens. Catherine watched her eldest son with a mixture of pride and concern, recognizing in him the same sense of duty that drove his father. Princess Charlotte proved to be the most emotionally intuitive of the three children. She would climb into Catherine's lap during quiet moments, offering wordless comfort that seemed wise beyond her years. One evening, Charlotte presented her mother with a drawing she had made at school, a family portrait showing all five of them together under a rainbow. Catherine kept the drawing on her dressing table, where she could see it each morning when she prepared for the day ahead. The palace staff had rallied around the princess with touching dedication. The head housekeeper began leaving small bouquets of flowers from the palace gardens in Catherine's private sitting room. The children's nanny organized special activities to keep them engaged and happy, while the private secretary ensured Catherine's schedule was manageable despite the increased responsibilities she now carried. Alone technology became both a blessing and a curse in maintaining the connection across continents. Video calls with William were scheduled around his official engagements and the significant time difference. The children would gather around Catherine's laptop, their faces pressed close to the screen as they shared stories about their day. But the slight delay in transmission and the formal backdrop of William's various accommodations served as constant reminders of just how far away he really was. Catherine found herself developing new routines to fill the spaces William had once occupied. She began taking longer walks through Hyde Park, often with just her protection officer for company. These solitary moments allowed her to process her emotions away from the constant scrutiny of palace life. The British public, always fascinated by the royal family, had noticed her increased solo appearances and began to speculate about how she was coping with the separation. The media coverage was largely sympathetic, but Catherine knew that any sign of struggle would be magnified and analyzed endlessly. Royal biographers and relationship experts offered their opinions on television programs and in newspaper columns, dissecting every photograph for signs of strain or strength. Catherine learned to ignore most of the commentary, but she could not completely shut out the noise of public speculation about her marriage. Letters of support began arriving at the palace from around the world. Women wrote about their own experiences with separation due to military deployment, work obligations, or other circumstances. Many shared stories of how they had maintained strong relationships despite distance and time apart. Catherine was touched by these personal accounts and asked her staff to send thoughtful responses to as many as possible. The most challenging moments came at night. When the palace grew quiet and the children were asleep, Catherine would sit in the living room she and William had decorated together, surrounded by photographs and mementos of their life as a family. She would read books, work on correspondence, or simply sit with her thoughts. Sometimes she would call her sister Pippa or her parents, but she was careful not to burden them with her worries about the separation. William's absence was felt most acutely during the children's bedtime routine. He had always been hands-on as a father, reading stories and saying prayers with each child. Catherine tried to maintain these traditions, but George in particular seemed to notice that something was missing. One night he asked if they could video call his father for bedtime stories. The calls became a nightly ritual, with William reading from whatever books were available in his various locations around the world. 3 weeks into the separation, Catherine received unexpected news that would test her composure in new ways. William's tour had been extended by an additional week due to scheduling conflicts and the importance of certain diplomatic meetings. The announcement would need to be made public, and Catherine would be expected to respond gracefully to questions about the impact on their family. She took the news privately in her study, allowing herself a few minutes of disappointment before calling the children together to explain the change in plans. The strength Catherine displayed during this period did not go unnoticed by those closest to the royal family. Senior courtiers remarked privately on her grace under pressure, while longtime staff members noted her increased warmth and accessibility. She seemed to understand instinctively that showing vulnerability, when carefully managed, could actually strengthen rather than weaken her position. The British public began to see her not just as a princess, but as a woman facing challenges they could recognize and admire. Halfway through William's absence, an unexpected crisis emerged that would test Catherine's resolve in ways she had never imagined. Prince Louis developed a high fever during the night, and what initially seemed like a common childhood illness quickly escalated into something more serious. Catherine found herself rushing to the hospital at 3 a.m, her youngest son burning with fever in her arms, while photographers somehow materialized outside the emergency entrance despite the late hour. The hospital staff worked efficiently to stabilize Louis, but the doctors wanted to keep him for observation. Catherine spent the entire night by his bedside, holding his small hand while machines monitored his vital signs. She had faced many challenges as a member of the royal family, but nothing compared to the helplessness of watching her child suffer, while the person she most wanted by her side was thousands of miles away on another continent. William learned about Louis's hospitalization during a diplomatic breakfast in Australia. The news reached him through his private secretary, who had been in constant contact with Catherine throughout the night. The prince excused himself from the formal meal, finding a private room where he could video call the hospital. Seeing his son's pale face on the screen connected to medical equipment was almost unbearable. For the first time since the tour began, William seriously considered abandoning his royal duties and flying home immediately. Catherine, exhausted but maintaining her composure, convinced William to continue with his scheduled engagements. Louis was receiving excellent care and the doctors were optimistic about his recovery. She understood the importance of William's diplomatic mission and refused to let a family crisis derail weeks of careful planning. But privately, she had never felt more alone or more aware of the sacrifices their royal positions demanded from their family. The media coverage of Louis's illness was intense but generally respectful. Photographers maintained a careful distance from the hospital, while reporting on the little prince's condition. Messages of support poured in from around the world, with many parents sharing their own experiences of childhood medical scares. Catherine was touched by the outpouring of sympathy, but she also felt the additional pressure of managing a personal crisis under public scrutiny. George and Charlotte were brought to visit their younger brother once his condition stabilized. Catherine watched her older children trying to process their fear and confusion about Louis's illness. George, in particular, seemed to struggle with his father's absence during this frightening time. He asked pointed questions about why William could not come home when his family needed him, questions that Catherine found difficult to answer without undermining the importance of royal duty. The turning point came on the 3rd day, when Louis's fever finally broke and his bright personality began to emerge again. Catherine felt a relief so profound it left her momentarily weak, as if she had been holding her breath for 72 hours straight. The medical team was pleased with his progress, and discharge was planned for the following day. Catherine called William immediately with the good news. And for the first time since the crisis began, they both allowed themselves to cry with relief. During Lewis's recovery, something unexpected happened that would become a defining moment for Catherine's public image. A young mother in the hospital ward recognized the princess despite her casual clothes and exhausted appearance. Instead of asking for a photograph or autograph, the woman simply approached and offered Catherine a cup of tea from the family room. They sat together in comfortable silence, two mothers understanding each other's worry without need for words. The story of this simple human interaction somehow reached the media, though neither woman had spoken to reporters. The image of Catherine accepting comfort from a fellow mother resonated powerfully with the British public and beyond. It highlighted her relatability and humanity in a way that formal royal appearances never could. Letters and messages flooded in from parents who had faced similar hospital vigils, expressing admiration for how she had handled the crisis. William's response to the family emergency revealed new depths to his character that impressed even his most seasoned advisors. Despite the enormous pressure he was under to complete his diplomatic mission successfully, his primary concern remained his family's well-being. He rearranged his schedule to ensure he was available for regular video calls with Louis during his recovery, often staying up late to accommodate the time difference. The crisis also strengthened the bond between Catherine and her in-laws in unexpected ways. King Charles called personally to check on Louis's progress and offered any assistance the family might need. Queen Camilla visited the hospital quietly, bringing gifts for all three children, and spending time with Catherine in a show of family solidarity that did not go unnoticed by royal watchers. When Louis was finally discharged from the hospital, Catherine faced another challenge, returning to her public duties while ensuring her son's full recovery. The palace announced a modified schedule that would allow her to spend more time at home while still fulfilling her essential obligations. This balancing act between royal duty and maternal responsibility became a masterclass in modern royal life that many other working mothers could relate to. The week following Louis's recovery brought an unexpected silver lining. The crisis had demonstrated Catherine's strength and capability in managing both family emergencies and public expectations. Polls showed increased public approval for her handling of the situation, with many praising her decision to put her child's needs first while maintaining her royal responsibilities. She had proven that showing vulnerability and prioritizing family could actually strengthen rather than weaken her position. As Louis returned to his normal, energetic self, Catherine reflected on the lessons learned during the most challenging week of the separation. She had discovered reserves of strength she did not know she possessed, and had gained new appreciation for the support system surrounding their family. Most importantly, she had shown her children that families could overcome difficulties even when physically separated, as long as love and communication remained strong. The crisis had also deepened her understanding of the unique challenges faced by royal families. Unlike other parents dealing with medical emergencies, every decision she made was scrutinized publicly. Yet she had learned to navigate this additional pressure while staying true to her instincts as a mother. The experience would serve her well in the challenges that still lay ahead before William's return. As William's tour entered its final month, Catherine began to feel the weight of accumulated exhaustion from carrying the family's responsibilities alone. The crisis with Louis had depleted her emotional reserves, and the constant public scrutiny had taken its toll in ways she was only beginning to acknowledge. She found herself snapping at staff members over minor issues and struggling to maintain her usual warmth during public appearances. The mask of royal composure was becoming increasingly difficult to wear. The children, too, were showing signs of strain from their father's prolonged absence. George had become withdrawn and serious beyond his years, often found reading alone in corners of the palace instead of playing with his siblings. Charlotte's normally sunny disposition had given way to occasional outbursts of frustration, while Louis had begun asking daily when his father would return home. Catherine realized that her own stress was affecting the children, creating a cycle of tension that seemed impossible to break. One particularly difficult evening, Catherine found herself sitting on the floor of the nursery at midnight, surrounded by toys and fighting back tears of frustration. The day had been filled with official engagements, a challenging phone call with William about scheduling conflicts, and a meltdown from Charlotte about missing her father. Catherine felt like she was failing everyone: her husband, her children, and the nation that looked to her for strength and stability. It was during this low point that Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, arrived unexpectedly at Kensington Palace. She had sensed from their recent phone conversations that her daughter was struggling, and she came prepared to provide the kind of practical, no-nonsense support that only a mother could offer. Carol immediately took charge of the household routines, allowing Catherine to step back and breathe for the first time in weeks. The arrival of her mother marked a turning point in Catherine's approach to the separation. Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, she began to accept help more readily and to acknowledge her own limitations. She reduced her public schedule slightly and focused on creating more meaningful moments with her children. Family game nights replaced formal dinners, and impromptu trips to the park became more frequent than official photo opportunities. William, sensing the strain in Catherine's voice during their daily calls, made a decision that surprised his diplomatic team. He requested a 48-hour break in his schedule for a secret flight home to London. The trip would be unofficial and unannounced, lasting just long enough for him to reunite with his family and provide the emotional support they desperately needed. The logistics were complicated, but his staff understood the importance of maintaining family stability during such a demanding tour. The surprise reunion took place on a quiet Sunday morning at Anmer Hall, the family's country home in Norfolk. Catherine had taken the children there for the weekend, seeking the privacy and normalcy that the countryside provided. When William's car pulled into the driveway, the children's screams of joy could be heard throughout the house. Catherine stood in the doorway, hardly believing that her husband was actually there, walking toward her with the smile she had missed so desperately. Those 48 hours together were like a healing balm for the entire family. They spent time walking through the gardens, playing football on the lawn, and simply being together without any official obligations or cameras. William could see the toll the separation had taken on Catherine, noting the shadows under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. She, in turn, observed how the constant travel and diplomatic pressure had aged him during their time apart. The conversations they shared during this brief reunion were among the most honest of their marriage. Catherine expressed her fears about managing everything alone, and her guilt about not being strong enough to handle the separation more gracefully. William acknowledged his own struggles with being away during Louis's illness and his frustration with the inflexibility of royal protocols. They both realized that their marriage was stronger than they had known, but also more vulnerable than they had previously acknowledged. The secret visit had to remain completely confidential, which meant no photographs or public acknowledgement of William's presence in England. This secrecy felt strange after years of living their lives under constant public scrutiny, but it also provided a precious gift of privacy that they rarely experienced. They could simply be a family without worrying about public perception or official protocol. When Monday morning arrived, William's departure was even more difficult than the original goodbye. The children clung to him with desperate intensity, begging him not to leave again. Catherine maintained her composure until after his car disappeared from view, then allowed herself the luxury of tears in the privacy of their country home. But this time, the tears were not just of sadness. They also carried hope and renewed strength for the final weeks of separation. The remaining time passed more quickly than Catherine had expected. The secret visit had recharged her batteries and reminded her of why their sacrifices were worthwhile. She returned to London with renewed energy for her royal duties and a clearer sense of how to manage the children's emotional needs during their father's absence. The countdown to William's return became a daily celebration, rather than a daily endurance test. Media coverage during the final weeks focused increasingly on Catherine's successful management of the separation and her growing confidence as a senior royal. Royal commentators noted her increased ease during public appearances and her apparent mastery of balancing family responsibilities with official duties. What they could not know was how much strength she had drawn from those secret 48 hours with William. The anticipation of reunion began to build throughout the palace staff and among royal watchers. Plans were made for William's official return, including a formal welcome ceremony and immediate family time away from public view. Catherine found herself preparing for their reunion with the same excited nervousness she had felt before their wedding day, as if she were meeting the love of her life all over again. As the final week began, Catherine reflected on how much she had learned about herself during the separation. She had discovered depths of strength and resilience she had not known she possessed. She had also learned valuable lessons about accepting help, managing stress, and maintaining perspective during difficult times. Most importantly, she had gained new appreciation for the strength of her marriage and the depth of their commitment to each other and their family. The final days before William's return were filled with the electric anticipation that seemed to charge every corner of Kensington Palace. Catherine found herself unable to sleep, lying awake at night imagining their reunion and planning every detail of their first moments together. The children sensed the excitement in the air and became increasingly energetic, counting down the days with homemade calendars and preparing welcome home signs decorated with glitter and family photographs. Catherine's approach to preparing for William's return revealed much about how the separation had changed her. Instead of obsessing over formal arrangements or official protocols, she focused on creating intimate moments that would matter most to their family. She planned William's favorite meal, arranged for fresh flowers throughout their private apartments, and ensured that his study would be exactly as he had left it 3 months earlier. The palace staff moved with quiet efficiency to prepare for the prince's homecoming. His valet pressed his civilian clothes and organized his personal belongings, while the household staff prepared the family's favorite rooms with extra care. Everyone who worked closely with the royal family understood that this reunion was more than just the end of an official tour. It represented the restoration of the family's emotional center. Media. Interest in William's return had reached fever pitch, with photographers camping outside the palace and royal correspondents speculating about every detail of the planned reunion. Catherine had requested privacy for their first moments together, but she understood that some level of public documentation would be necessary. She worked with the palace communications team to arrange a brief photo opportunity that would satisfy media interest while protecting their family's intimate moments. On the morning of William's expected arrival, Catherine woke before dawn and spent extra time preparing herself. She chose a dress in William's favorite shade of blue and took special care with her appearance, wanting to look beautiful for the man who had been away for so long. The children were equally excited, with Charlotte insisting on wearing her best dress and the boys combing their hair with unusual attention to detail. The family gathered in the palace's private sitting room to wait for word of William's arrival. His flight had landed at Heathrow, and the drive to Kensington Palace would take approximately an hour depending on traffic. Catherine felt her heart racing as the minutes ticked by, a sensation she had not experienced since their early courtship days. The children sat together on the sofa, too excited to focus on books or games, their eyes constantly darting to the windows facing the courtyard. When word finally came that William's car had entered the palace grounds, Catherine felt a mixture of relief, joy, and nervous anticipation that took her breath away. She had imagined this moment countless times during the separation, but the reality of it was overwhelming in ways she had not expected. The children rushed to the window, pressing their faces against the glass to catch the first glimpse of their father's return. The car pulled into the courtyard with ceremonial precision, but Catherine could see William's face in the window, searching for his family with an intensity that matched her own. When the vehicle stopped and the door opened, time seemed to slow down. William emerged looking tired but determined, his eyes immediately finding the window where his wife and children waited for him. Catherine held back for a moment, allowing the children to rush outside first. She watched from the doorway as George, Charlotte, and Louis threw themselves into their father's arms with abandon, their voices mixing together in a chorus of excitement and joy. William knelt down to embrace all three at once, his own emotion evident in the way he held them close and the tears that threatened to spill over despite the presence of cameras. When William finally looked up and saw Catherine standing in the doorway, the world seemed to fall away around them. Despite the crowds of staff, security personnel, and media representatives, despite the formal setting and official nature of his return, there was only each other. Catherine walked toward him slowly, drinking in every detail of his appearance and marveling at how familiar yet somehow changed he looked after 3 months. Apart, the embrace that followed was everything Catherine had dreamed of during the long nights of separation. William pulled her close with a desperation that matched her own, and for several precious seconds they simply held each other without speaking. The cameras captured the moment, but somehow the intensity of their reunion transcended the public nature of the setting. This was not a photo opportunity or a royal ceremony. This was simply two people who loved each other being reunited after the longest separation of their marriage. When they finally separated enough to look at each other, both were fighting back tears. William's hands framed Catherine's face as if he needed to convince himself that she was really there, really in his arms again. Catherine reached up to touch his cheek, noting the new lines around his eyes and the slight changes that 3 months of intense travel and diplomatic pressure had created. The official part of the homecoming was brief but necessary. William thanked the staff for their support during his absence and acknowledged the successful completion of his diplomatic mission. But everyone present could see that his attention was focused entirely on his family, and the formal proceedings were concluded as quickly as protocol allowed. As they walked back into the palace together, Catherine felt a completeness she had almost forgotten was possible. The children chattered excitedly about everything their father had missed during his absence, while William's arm remained firmly around Catherine's waist, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. The separation was officially over, but Catherine knew that the real work of rebuilding their daily rhythms and reconnecting as a family was just beginning. The media coverage of the reunion was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators noting the genuine emotion displayed by both William and Catherine. The images of their embrace were broadcast around the world, becoming symbolic of enduring love and the strength of committed relationships. But for Catherine, the most important moment was yet to come, their first private conversation when they could finally speak freely about everything they had experienced during their time apart. The first evening of William's return was spent in the quiet sanctuary of their private family quarters, away from the cameras and official obligations that had dominated the day. Catherine had arranged for a simple dinner of William's favorite foods, and they sat around the kitchen table like any ordinary family catching up after a long absence. But there was nothing ordinary about the intensity of their reconnection, or the profound changes that 3 months of separation had brought to each of them. The children dominated the conversation initially, eager to share every detail of their lives that William had missed despite their regular video calls. George proudly showed his father the school project he had completed about the Commonwealth, while Charlotte performed the entire school play she had starred in during William's absence. Louis, now fully recovered from his illness, climbed repeatedly onto his father's lap, as if physical contact could make up for all the bedtime stories and morning hugs they had missed. As the evening progressed, and the children gradually grew tired, William and Catherine found themselves alone together for the first time in 3 months. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it was charged with the weight of everything they had experienced apart and everything they needed to share with each other. They moved to their private sitting room, where Catherine had placed fresh flowers and lit candles, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and warmth. William spoke first, describing the loneliness that had haunted him throughout the tour, despite its diplomatic successes. He had represented his country with distinction, strengthening relationships with Commonwealth leaders and advancing important causes. But every achievement had felt hollow without Catherine there to share it. He talked about lying awake in unfamiliar hotel rooms, calculating the time difference so he could imagine what his family was doing at that exact moment. Catherine shared her own journey through the separation, speaking honestly about the moments when she had felt overwhelmed and uncertain. She described the weight of responsibility she had carried alone, the challenge of maintaining public composure while processing private emotions, and the fear that had gripped her during Louis's illness. She also spoke about the strength she had discovered within herself and the new confidence she had gained in her ability to manage both family and royal duties independently. They talked about the secret visit William had made halfway through the tour, acknowledging how crucial those 48 hours had been for their marriage. Both realized that the separation had taught them things about themselves and their relationship that they could never have learned any other way. They had discovered that their love was strong enough to survive physical distance and professional pressures, but they had also learned the importance of maintaining connection, even during the most demanding periods of royal duty. The conversation continued late into the night, covering topics they had never discussed so deeply before. They talked about their fears for their children growing up in the public eye, their hopes for the future of the monarchy, and their dreams for their family's life together. The separation had stripped away many of the distractions of daily life, allowing them to focus on what truly mattered in their relationship. William expressed his admiration for how Catherine had handled the crisis with Louis, acknowledging that her strength and composure during that frightening time had impressed not just him but royal observers around the world. Catherine, in turn, praised William's commitment to completing his diplomatic mission despite the personal cost, recognizing the importance of his work for the future of the Commonwealth and his role as future king. As they prepared for bed together for the first time in 3 months, both William and Catherine felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded them of their early relationship. The separation had changed them both, and they approached this reunion with new appreciation for what they meant to each other. The simple act of sharing a bed again felt like a profound gift after so many nights of sleeping alone. The following weeks brought a period of readjustment as the family learned to be together again. William needed time to reconnect with the children's daily routines and to understand how they had grown and changed during his absence. Catherine, who had become accustomed to making all parenting decisions alone, had to learn to share that responsibility again. The process was not always smooth, but it was undertaken with patience and understanding on both sides. The media coverage of William's return and the family's reunion had been overwhelmingly positive, with many commentators noting how the separation seemed to have strengthened rather than weakened their marriage. Royal biographers began writing about Catherine's successful management of the family during William's absence as a defining moment in her evolution as a senior royal. The public had witnessed her grace under pressure and her ability to balance personal challenges with public responsibilities. 6 months after William's return, Catherine reflected on how the separation had fundamentally changed their marriage for the better. They had learned to appreciate each other more deeply, to communicate more honestly about their needs and fears, and to support each other through the unique challenges of royal life. The experience had also taught them valuable lessons about resilience, independence, and the importance of maintaining strong family bonds despite professional obligations. The 3-month separation had tested every aspect of their relationship, from their ability to parent effectively while apart to their capacity to maintain emotional intimacy across continents. They had emerged from the experience with a stronger marriage, more confident in their individual abilities, and more committed than ever to supporting each other through the demands of royal duty. Most importantly, they had proven to themselves and to the world that modern royal marriages could survive and thrive despite the unique pressures they faced. Their reunion had become a symbol of enduring love and commitment, inspiring countless other couples facing their own challenges with separation and distance. The embrace that had captivated the world represented not just the end of a difficult period, but the beginning of a new chapter in their life together, built on the foundation of everything they had learned about love, duty, and the strength that comes from weathering life's storms together.